Hey guys, welcome back to SourceFedNERD, and can you believe it? 2016 is almost dead and gone. Actually, I had to shoot this way in advance, so for all I know, the world ended long before this video came out, and the automatic video uploader is just pumping this content out into the post-apocalyptic void that used to be Earth. Fun! In this video, I'm gonna be counting down our top 10 favorite movies of 2016 based on the incredibly subjective opinions of the SourceFedNERD team. I'm also gonna split these up into categories so that we don't have to have silly debates about whether or not movies from completely different genres with totally different purposes are better than each other. Like, we don't have to compare Citizen Kane and The Dark Knight, though I think The Dark Knight is way better. But here goes, the top 10 movies as determined by SourceFedNERD in a kind of particular order. First off, let's get the no-brainers out of the way with the critical darlings category. These are the films that you're gonna see on all those like New York Times best of the year kind of lists, and these are the few that we actually agree are pretty damn good movies. First up, Hunt for the Wilderpeople. This movie's about a young Kiwi kid who's obsessed with hip hop. Like, he has a dog named Tupac, and he has to go on the run after some tragic stuff, and kind of feels like the book/movie Hatchet, but also kind of like Goonies. And here's the best reason to check this movie out. Sure, it's hilarious, but also this movie was made by Taika Waititi. He's about to be a huge name and a very difficult to pronounce name because he's directing Thor Ragnarok, and that's great news. Okay, the next little critical darling to make sure to see is Moonlight. So not long ago, everyone was singing the praises of Richard Linklater's Boyhood, and they should because that movie is a freaking masterpiece. But the thing that people kept saying was that it truly captured what it feels like to be a boy growing up in America. Except, let's be honest, that kid has a pretty great life, and that white suburban life isn't the norm for a huge section of the population. Enter Moonlight. So this movie follows a young African-American boy growing up in Miami, which is where I grew up, and I'll just tell you, it's a terrible place to learn how to treat other people. And he has to come to grips with being gay in a culture that is not cool with being gay. And also, unlike Boyhood, but maybe more real for some of us, life hits him with drastic changes every time we check in on his growth. So if any part of that kid's upbringing sounds relatable, this movie might connect with you more than anything else you've ever seen. But here's what's more interesting. If that kid does not sound relatable to you, it's actually maybe even better for you to check it out because it's that good at making you feel what that life is like. So here's a great opportunity to try on a different pair of shoes. Oh, also, it has Mahershala Ali, who was maybe the best part of Luke Cage in it, so yeah, check it out. Up next in the, yeah, these are going to get a lot of awards category is Arrival. Can I just say, I freaking love alien movies. Like, I have a huge soft spot for all of them. From Independence Day to E.T. to Mars Attacks to Alien and Predator movies. But there are 3 alien movies that really stayed with me probably for my whole life, and that's because they're less about what we learn about the aliens and more about what we learn about ourselves. So those movies are Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Contact, and now Arrival. Don't watch Arrival and expect War of the Worlds, which I also liked a lot. In some ways, it's the antithesis of those movies, actually. And that might be the most realistic take. If aliens were to make contact with us, we can only hope that our first thoughts are, how do we communicate with them, rather than, how do we defeat them? Because let's be honest, they can probably kick our technological asses. So I don't want to say too much about Arrival, and it's definitely a movie that can be spoiled, so go watch it quick if you haven't. But if one of your favorite parts of Independence Day is the part where they use Morse code communication, or if you love how World War II movies sometimes have a subplot about code breaking, then this movie is probably up your alley. However, if you're like, that all sounds real boring, then hey, yeah, maybe this movie isn't for you. It's about communication and language. But anyway, rounding out our critical darlings list is the movie Hell or High Water, and damn, this movie was good. Like, seriously, it's a modern take on a simple Western story, but it's also timeless and could easily have taken place in the 1800s. The only difference is that the current economic climate definitely plays a big role in the motivations of pretty much everyone in this movie. This is another movie I don't want to say too much about, but it's the best you've ever seen Chris Pine be. This actually came out at the same time as Star Trek Beyond, and seeing his range from Kirk to this character here made me respect him so much more as an actor. And Ben Foster, who I still love from his Disney Channel origins, he almost steals the whole movie. And not to sound too much like Stefan, but this movie has everything. Action, drama, comedy, shootouts, bank robberies. That thing where in small towns, the waitresses are like really sassy and yet it's like also really charming. It's just a great movie, watch it, please. And now, some honorable mentions for our critical darlings category. They include Sully and Deepwater Horizon. They're both great movies, but also they're movies that are based on insane real life events, so it felt more appropriate to focus on wholly original stories. Oh, also La La Land looks great, but its release date is after we shot this. Up next are horror highlights of 2016. Like I said, these movies don't need to be compared with the other categories, but but for us, these were some of the best times we had at the movies because they made us feel something. And usually in this case, that was total and utter terror. First up is a quick shout out to Green Room, which has the horrible effect of making you terrified of your favorite uncle, Patrick Stewart. This movie is about a group of ordinary people trapped in an extraordinary situation, which might sound like a lot of movies, except this movie has those ordinary people still be ordinary throughout it. They don't become Rambos and Terminators. They suck at saving themselves. And that's probably why it's so easy to put yourself in their shoes and realize, oh hey, I would die in this situation. Quick side note, sadly, this is one of the last films to feature Anton Yelchin, but just like I said about Chris Pine before, this was also out during Star Trek Beyond, which Yelchin is also in, and if you watch both this and Star Trek, you'll get a new respect for Yelchin. That guy was great, and he's gonna be really, 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 really missed. Next in our horror highlights list is probably this year's kind of Sam Raimi-esque gross out horror, but it's actually a disservice to make it seem like that's all it is. I'm talking about Don't Breathe. It isn't just gross. In fact, I would say it's not even that graphic of a movie. It's more that there's a very, very disturbing section of this movie that is absolutely what you're gonna be talking about after you watch it. Aside from that, this is a really good trapped in a house with a monster kind of movie, and it's that much better that the monster, he's just an old blind man. You know that trite, I was on the edge of my seat quote you hear a lot? I guess that applies here, except I'd put it more like, you know when you're in a car with someone and you really need to poop and you're trying to play it cool, but all these alarms start going off in your brain and then you have to like fight through it, and you successfully do for like a second, but then suddenly you see that you're getting close to your house and your brain's like, oh, I guess it's time to go to the bathroom. And then you have to do everything you can to not poop your friend's car, and this movie is that feeling. Except instead of needing to poop, it's the feeling that you're gonna die. Doesn't that sound fun? Honestly, this movie gets my side award for best roller coaster ride of 2016. It's a goddamn delight, and it's a lot of fun and a lot of stress. And then our final 2016 horror highlight is The Witch. Or kind of The Witch, because of the double V's. Anyway. Remember when there were trailers for The Village and it was like, ooh, that's a really creepy time to set a horror movie, and then the movie kind of never really lives up to that? Well, this movie's also around that time and it totally lives up to that. It's the creepiest movie, and I don't want to give anything away, but I'll say that the things that happen here are the kinds of things that if you look them up, you'd be like, oh, that sounds kind of lame and maybe even a little corny. And instead when you watch it, you're like, I'm so sorry I said anything bad, I'm sorry I said anything bad, save me Jeebus, please. Seriously, watch it in the dark, get scared as hell, and when it's done, be left with that feeling that you might have permanently damaged your soul. How's that for an endorsement? And our honorable mention here goes to Ouija. Not the movie that came out a few years ago, that one sucks. But this year's prequel has no business being this good. Basically, if you like The Conjuring, you might like this. It's got that 1960s glimmer where it feels like good and fun at times, and then it takes the sharpest turn I've ever felt in the cinema. And there's this one scary moment where a spirit attacks in a way that I've just never seen before in a movie, and that's always fun. Give it a watch if you want just a fun horror movie that again has no business turning out as intense and scary as it does. Okay, so that's 7 movies down, and we got 3 main slots left in our top 10 movies of the year, and we're gonna focus on our bread and butter here, our nerd genre films. First up, we gotta talk Captain America Civil War. I recently talked about how the comic book storyline gets into some issues that I think the movie unfortunately didn't have time for, but this movie's good enough to get away with leaving that stuff out. Think about this. The fact that we're almost a decade into watching these characters, and at that point, we were 12 MCU movies deep, and then break all our favorite heroes apart and aim them at each other. The hype was real, but the movie pretty much lived up to most of it. And the breakdown of the relationship between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, it feels like breaking up with your first love. It's awful, but not until your heart and nerves are exposed like that do you realize how much you actually were capable of caring. So for that, you end up being thankful. You saw this movie, you knew it was good. So let's move on to, in some ways, the anti-Civil War. Definitely the anti-superhero movie. It's Deadpool. I read the script for Deadpool years ago and I remember thinking, hey, this movie's gonna be great. Too bad they're never gonna make it. And then Ryan Reynolds lifted the whole thing onto his tremendous trap muscles and willed it into being. So thank you for that, Ray. This movie isn't life-changing, it's just more exactly the palate cleanser we needed, right in the midst of the most self-important superhero movies of all time. And considering this was pretty much the biggest hit that no one expected to be this big, I'm just gonna guess you saw it, so I'll move on. And finally, our last nerdy genre film to make our top 10, drumroll please, is Doctor Strange. I'm gonna flat out right here say it's not a perfect film, kinda like how Civil War wasn't either, but all of those films gave us something that we'd never had before. And I've never done drugs, I know I'm boring, but Doctor Strange made me feel like I'd done a little. This is like when you read books and they're all fine and good, and then you stumble upon a book like House of Leaves. Or if you've never read that, maybe even like your first choose your own adventure book. It's the medium you know and love, but suddenly it gets broken. The story cheats. It does things books aren't supposed to do. Doctor Strange did that for superhero movies. And there probably isn't a better example of this than how the movie ends. And while I won't spoil it since it's still a pretty recent release, I will say it's a perfect ending for a movie with themes about time and healing oneself. And if you didn't like it, fight me. Again and again and again and again, and eventually you might be willing to bargain. Okay, huge caveat here in our honorable nerdy mentions. This video was shot before 2 major nerd releases, and I think they're both gonna be amazing. First up, all signs are pointing to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them just being a great movie, so I'm gonna guess that it would be way up here on our list. I love the Harry Potter movies, but adult wizards headed toward a global war, that sounds way up my alley, so I'm pumped. The other honorable nerdy mention, because it's not out yet, Star Wars Rogue One. And honestly, I almost put it on the official list just based on the trailers alone. I can't explain how hyped I am for this movie. It's looking like it's going to be the only Star Wars movie to actually feel like a war movie. And yet at the same time, telling a smaller story that's not about the Skywalker family. That's so fresh. And just prediction here though, when you see this video, you're gonna know if I'm right or wrong. I think we're gonna get the best, most terrifying version of Darth Vader we've ever seen in this movie, because this is him at his prime. And he's got the best defensive tactic ever. He's covered in plot armor. The dude cannot die in this movie. He's playing in God mode. Oh my God, I'm so excited for this. All right, and that's our list of top 10 movies for 2016. However, I'm just gonna quickly mention some of our favorite guilty pleasure movies this year because they deserve some acknowledgement. They didn't make our cut, but they are movies that just really worked for us. First up is 10 Cloverfield Lane. The funny thing about that movie is that the Cloverfield connection added to the movie is probably maybe the weakest part of it. It's just the rest of the movie was so good, and the tension between these 3 fantastic actors, it's perfect. I don't know if any movie had more tension in it this year except maybe Don't Breathe. Also, a guilty pleasure combo of movies we loved, Zootopia and The Jungle Book. 2 completely different takes on anthropomorphic animals, and yet they pretty much nailed it. And finally, 2 movies I want to give a shout out to as my own little guilty pleasures. It's also a pair of connected movies. They're Everybody Wants Some and Don't Think Twice. I spent my entire time in college in an almost quasi-fraternity, except it was a comedy group instead of a douchey group. But Everybody Wants Some nails the feeling of going to college and becoming the weirdest but most fun and raw version of yourself. If you aren't in college yet, watch that movie and get so excited about the life that awaits. Honestly, it's probably the best ad for a college you could make. And if you're already out of college, watch that movie and cry about the fact that you're not there now. Oh, and speaking of that, that's why I pair it with Don't Think Twice. It's a movie about an improv group who also was performing comedy for years and years and years, and then one of them books SNL, or an SNL equivalent, and everything changes, and you realize, hey, just because you've been doing improv and comedy for over a decade, that doesn't mean you're actually good enough to make it. Most of us will never be famous, and that's just a kick in the adult pants, and this movie just captures that feeling and puts it on screen, and in some way that makes it better because you know that at least, hey, you're not alone? All right, guys, that's it for this list. SourceFedNERD's favorite movies from 2016. I know you're already in the comments typing up what movies we forgot, but I'm actually really excited to read what you recommend because you guys have damn good taste. Also, please check out these movies, they're all so good. I'm Filup Molina. Follow me on Twitter @Fimo if you want to talk movies any further or anything else, I'm always down. And subscribe to this channel because we have some really exciting stuff coming in 2017. All right, that's it. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye to 2017.